Political analyst Khanyi Magubane joins us now via video link to weigh in on the signing ceremony of the Electoral Code of Conduct. Khanyi, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Well, the IEC chairperson was, of course, at pains to just warn against the incitement of violence in the upcoming elections. I mean, weigh in on this in as far as just what we've seen leading up to these crucial elections.
Thank you very much, Onati. Indeed, it was a very important point to raise because we know that provinces like KZN have seen a lot of pre-election political violence where we've seen bloodshed of councillors, candidates, where we've seen a lot of intimidation. And the KZN province is particularly important. We heard the IEC officials mentioning earlier on that KZN and Gauteng province were the two most important provinces because they hold most of the voters, 6.5 million in Gauteng and 5.7 in KZN. And unfortunately, it is a fact that in KZN there are hotspots that continue in each election season to have violence. And so the Electoral Code of Conduct becomes even more important because political parties have a responsibility to familiarize their members with the Electoral Code of Conduct because there are consequences to infringements. We know that political parties can even be disqualified if found guilty over and above the 200,000 rand fine that they can be fined for infringements. Their votes can be cancelled, and all the work that they've put into the election and the electioneering can even turn into nothing if at the end of the day the members are not aware of the election code of conduct and abide by it.
And just looking at, the run-up to these elections, of course, with the new Electoral Amendment Act, there's so many pertinent issues that also needed to be clarified. Testament to that is, of course, all the court cases that we are seeing. But also what is of worry is, come voting day, the ordinary citizens will be faced with a completely different look and feel in terms of how these elections had been conducted previously with, 3 ballot papers as an example. How crucial then is it for the IEC to make sure that this goes as seamlessly as possible? It has been really put through its paces, not only by political parties, but also civil society at large.
Onati, I can say these are possibly the most important elections that we've had since 1994, simply because the political landscape is so different from previous years when we've had elections. And I think the most important factor this year is that there is no political party that is promised an outright majority. This is the first time where we are moving into the reality of coalition government at a national level. And when we look at the structures of state design, particularly the structure of the South African state design. And South Africa is what we call a decentralized state, where you have a national level, you have provincial, you have regional, and you have local. And so those multi-spheres of government are very characteristic of decentralized states. And the purpose of that is to be able to enable services to reach to people much quicker. It's to enable the judiciary to work more efficiently, to enable the state treasury to allocate funds more equally to different provinces, to enable the work of government to continue. And coalitions will definitely come into that play and destabilize that to a certain extent, because we know that when a party is in power and they are the ruling party, then the policies of those of that party are the policies of the day that that party is implementing at a national level. Now, when you have a multi-party scenario, then you're going to have policies of different political parties converging, and the reality of trying to implement those policies at a national level without the proper legislative framework that we need so desperately in order to run a country that is going to be politically stable under a coalition. We just don't have those conditions. So these elections are particularly important, first and foremost, from that point of view. But secondly, South Africa is going into these elections having made quite a few bold moves. We know that when it went to the International Court of Justice to advocate for the case of Palestine, in many ways, we stood on opposite ends to some of our Western counterparts, and that will also have an impact perhaps in our foreign diplomacy. And we go into these elections not even, I would say, confident of the fact that we may retain some of those diplomatic ties. We go into these elections also as South Africa being very key and instrumental in helping many countries around the continent, to settle and to go into peace talks, especially countries like South Sudan, who we've seen have really been ravaged by ethnic clashes. And South Africa has really been instrumental in going into those regions. And so positioning itself, South Africa, as a country to go to in order to help some of those African countries to politically stabilize themselves. So on those fronts, Unathi, these are incredibly important elections, and that's why they cannot afford to be anything but free and fair. It's important that South Africa, has free and fair elections that are credible to the global community.
Talking about positioning yourself as a country and credibility, I know for one party who would want to, or a party that would want to, go into these elections seemingly credible, and also, of course, wanting to present a pertinent or a certain position would be the ruling party. We've, of course, been, hearing that there is not going to be one outright winner. When we talk about the ANC, I cannot not ask you this question. The development that we saw today. The former National Assembly Speaker, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, who's also a very senior member of the ANC, appearing in court today. Of course, she was released on a bail of 50,000 rands, but essentially serious charges against her. She's facing 12 charges related to corruption and one of money laundering. What position then does this put the ANC in?
There can be no denying that the public want to see perpetrators of corruption being brought to book. We want to see individuals being named and shamed and being convicted for crimes committed, because this sends a signal and this sends the message out to South Africans that the ANC is committed to rooting out rotten elements in its within its ranks. And whilst we do know that South Africans have been calling for the movement to act on those who've been called or those who've been accused of corruption, the question is what's driving it at this particular juncture? Because there is an element, I would say, of grandstanding. There is an element of doing it for the specific purposes of show rather than doing it intentionally, because this is what we believe is the right thing to do, because we've seen there's been a very lax and a very relaxed, move towards bringing people to conviction. As Mapisa-Nqakula was in court today, there should have been many others who were in court last week, last month, last year. This should have been one of many ongoing cases of corruptions that have been leveled against many ANC officials or those in government. And so, yes, the timing of this entire case is suspicious, and it smacks of grandstanding, because it's playing into what we want. We want to see those convictions. We want to see people being brought to book. But what is the motive of doing it? Is it part and parcel of electioneering to say, hey, look, here's the poster child for corruption. We're going to use Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula as that poster child that we can say we've done something, we've prosecuted someone, we've arrested somebody. And I think that one individual being taken to court is not nearly enough for us to forget all the many others that still need to face their day in court.